Ithildin is a script that only reflects star and moonlight. And in the book they say it only shows because Gandalf muttered some words that activated it. So you would not always see this gate standing out at the front of the wall if the moon is the right place.
Speak, friend, and enter.
The sentence, speak, friend, and enter, is actually written there in Grey Elvish. So if you would just read aloud what the letters were saying, it would be Pedomellon Amino, and the door would immediately open. So it's the code word is actually written on the door, and just reading it aloud would make the doors open. And it is mentioned in the book that this is the case. And the reason for that is that it was built in a much more trusting time, where the code word was just more like a nice extra that was not really used by anybody. The doors were always open during the time of peace between dwarves and elves.
Do not disturb the water.
The being in the water is never really explained, what kind of creature it is and where it comes from. Just that it was living in the depth of the mountains and slipped out into this lake once the lake was created.
Speak, friend.
The area where they are standing only exists because the lake has lowered its level since the time when Balin and the other dwarves entered. So Balin and the other dwarves could not get out because the lake was reaching up to the very edge of the door, and the Watcher actually captured Oin, I think. It's mentioned in the Mazarbul book that Gimli and Gandalf read later. Gandalf was in Moria before, and in the book he says that the doors open very easily from the inside. You just push them out.
Goblins.
So goblins and orcs are used like intermediary in The Hobbit. I always took it to say that goblins are smaller, like the orcs that live in caves and under the mountains and in hills. They are the goblins and smaller, and the orcs are more the ones that are out in the open, marching in the armies of Sauron, etc. So they would be a bit taller. In The Lord of the Rings, I think they mostly use the word orcs, which is the Elvish word for these creatures. This was, I think, the first shot that Legolas does in this movie. And Legolas, well, the actor Orlando Bloom, sometimes he has really good form of archery and sometimes not so much. And in the first movie, his form of archery is still quite good, and it gets worse and worse through the movies.
Bilbo had a set of mithril rings.
So Tolkien had the idea of, if dwarves, written with an F at the end, FS, dwarves were part of the world, then they wouldn't have remained with a simple plural, like adding an S to the end of the word. Instead, if a word was used a lot, the forms of the plurals would change. And so he wrote elves with VES and dwarves with VES to show this. And of course, the editor of the first Lord of the Rings edition, he noticed these mistakes and corrected them all. So Tolkien spent another effort to just correct what the editor corrected. And he missed instances and it was a huge mess. And I think this was only corrected with the 50-year anniversary in 2004. Also, Tolkien thought that if dwarves are really, really common in our world, we wouldn't call them dwarves in plural, but dwarros, which is a more mutated form of a plural. So that is why when Gandalf says the English name of Khazad-dûm, he says it's Dwaro, dwell.
He's been following us for 3 days.
So they have been in the mines for 3 days already, and they are towards the exit. That's why from now on everything flows more quickly and you end up seeing them running out. But there was kind of a time switch here. In the book you get a bit more detail of what happens in the mines and basically how long it takes and what everybody feels and how dark it is and oppressive.
Yes, Smeagol he was once called, before the ring found him.
The things that Gandalf says now, Frodo will refer to in the second movie.
Even the very wise cannot see all ends.
The whole conversation about this morality and philosophy that happens here between Gandalf and Frodo happens in the Shire in the book, because basically just before Frodo is convinced to set out, he is already having all these strong doubts and fears. It makes more sense to place them here in the mines, where everything is so dark and a bit hopeless to address these issues. But in the book, it just sets the tone of the whole story very early on.
The air doesn't smell so foul down here.
In the book, it's mentioned that at this crossroads where you have the three ways branching, you have one going down, one going up, and one going straight, and Gandalf chooses the one going up because he thinks that after 3 days it should be time to go back up to the level of the outside world, while at the moment they're really down deep in the mines. In the documentaries, they describe how difficult it was to create a room in miniature that you could light in a way that it would appear to be endless. And yeah, they made a great job. I mean, you can't see the end of this. And this is the Great Hall of Khazad-dûm, where feasts would happen and where the whole of the kingdom would unite and celebrate. The inscription on the tomb is said in the book to be in Dwarvish and the tongues of men. And when you read it in the English original, you can actually read it to be Dwarvish words and English words, which was always very confusing for me. And when I read it in German, my native language, it also turned out it was actually writing the words in German in the second line. And it was only then that I really understood what it means when they say the tongues of men. Because Tolkien consequently translated everything, or he says he translated everything that he writes in English from the common tongue, the West one, that the hobbits and most of the other free peoples use, and also the orcs. So everything that would be in that tongue in the manuscripts that Tolkien found, as he says, or translated, he would translate into English. And that will also be translated into the other languages that the Lord of the Rings was translated into. It's one of the last foolish things that Pippin does. He does some in the third movie as well, but not too many afterwards. Oh, in the book, they actually have this place where there is a hole in the ground much earlier. It's not the same chamber as where they are now, the chamber of Mazabul. Pippin drops a stone into what seems to be a well, and it just falls down and alerts the orcs, and they hear hammer sounds, and it's only a day or more later that they are caught up to by the orcs. Aragorn's form is not great. I try to judge the release of each of them. So Legolas is really good at well anchoring here at the corner of the mouth, and he has a great release in this shot. Aragorn not so much, he lets go like this instead of pulling back. I have shot with 2 arrows before when doing archery, and it's really not working as well as it looks here. So basically you get half the energy per arrow, and they both fly much slower. So in the book, there's no scene with the troll. I think there is a troll in the chamber, but not with Frodo. Or fighting against him, but there is, after the attack of the orcs ceases, a captain who comes in and attacks Frodo, and he's the one who injures him. So this whole thing of Frodo being uninjured is not exactly following the books. So because of the adrenaline shock, Frodo and also Sam, who got a cut on the scalp, they are running along with everybody else, but as soon as they are leaving Khazad-dûm and are reaching close to Lorien, they actually lag behind, and Aragorn has to tend to them, because they are quite wounded. So Frodo has huge bruises at the place where the spear went against his skin. So when they leave this chamber, in the book, Gandalf puts a spell on the door. There's a back door where they leave, and they don't enter the main hall again. The Balrog comes into the chamber, senses the counterspell, and actually breaks it. So that is the major reason why Gandalf is so exhausted when he's fighting on the bridge, that he cannot pull himself up. The sound of the Balrog was made by putting 2 concrete blocks on top of each other and pulling the one across the other. And then, of course, using some digital enhancement. So this very low, powerful grinding sound is just stone against stone.
A Balrog. demon of the ancient world.
The chorus you hear in the background that's saying this whoo, whoo, it's I think a club of rugby players that were cast for making this vocal choral background choir. Have we seen another shot of that? Yep, great release. Not perfect, but quite good. The orcs have horrible release. How can they aim and hit anything? In many of these shots where you see Frodo being quite small, he is played by his double, but they added his face in afterwards, so that you could have the shot of both of them, Aragorn and Frodo, being shown at the same time. And it also happens later when Gandalf dies and Frodo and the others are carried away. You will see the face of Frodo superimposed on the smaller body. So some big issue with the book here is that in the book it says that around the Balrog darkness spread like wings, and in the movie they actually gave the Balrog wings, which is, to my understanding, also completely against the law, because Melkor was not really able to give many of his creatures flying ability. Now, he could have been like the only Balrog that was able to fly, but he's not described as like that in the book. And also, the creature is supposed to be over man's high, and not 3, 4, 5 times the size of a man.
Wielder of the flame of Arnor, the dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun!
So he's the servant of the secret fire because he has the fire of Arnor, which is the ring of fire, Narya, which was given to him by Círdan when Gandalf arrived in Middle-earth. And he just destroyed the sword of the Balrog. It's something that you don't quite catch. So orcs can't walk around in daylight, that's why they're safe for some time. But they have to reach the forest of Lothlorien quickly, as Aragorn will be saying in a minute. The whole scene of entering Lothlorien is quite different in the book, but I think what is similar is Gimli's opposition to the whole idea of having an elf being there who's terrible in power, and he's either scared or the only one who can resist her. And exactly as it is described in the movie, he will turn very quickly and love her and cherish her above all others.
We have not had dealings with the dwarves since the Dark.
So the dwarves don't usually teach
And you know what this
their own
dwarf says to
language.
that? Ishkakwi, Aidorug Nul.
Now everybody acts like they understood what that meant, so they're not supposed, from the law, to know what dwarves say when they speak their own language. However, for this movie, I think the official translation of that sentence is something like, "I spit on your mother's grave," so it's quite a stark language. And, of course, you want to show the audience that it's something bad by having Aragorn react in a pained manner.
You carry a heavy burden, Frodo. Don't carry the weight of the dead.
Boromir is a great character, and in the book you have more scenes where Boromir is like shown to be really just a great person, or just a really capable person. For example, he's the one when they are huddled into the snow in Caradhras, who says like the snow is stopped falling and the wind is turning, and it takes the hobbits 2 hours or something like that to understand that the wind is actually changing. So the scenes now, they shot with a higher frames per second again as the attack of the ring wraiths, and then they slowed it down, and because the sound would be warped if they did that, the same thing with the sound, they actually had to re-speak the whole scene. Galadriel is one from the high lineage of the High Elves, the Noldor, while Celeborn is from the Grey Elves. And so there's a different level of power, knowledge, wisdom in there, though Celeborn also is one of the high-ranking elves of Middle-earth.
For I much desire to speak with him.
But you see that it is Galadriel who is able to read minds, and Celeborn is not.
Gandalf the Grey did not pass the borders of this land.
Galadriel learned much of what she knows and can do from Melian, who was a Maiar, a being on the same level as Gandalf and Sauron, who are the helpers of the gods.
A Balrog of Morgoth.
Balrogs are also Maiar.
Yet hope remains, while the company is true.
In the book, when she looks at Sam, he becomes all red and ashamed and quickly looks away. So Pippin asks him whether he should be worried that he gets a knife in his back by Sam, because Sam looked the most treacherous of them all. And Sam basically has the only answer that he felt completely naked in front of her and was just ashamed of being so, unconcealed. The lament for Gandalf and the poem Sam makes about the fireworks is also in the book. So it's nice to have this extra scene here in the extended edition.
She spoke of my father and the fall of Gondor.
In the book, she also speaks to him of being able to give him the ring and what he would do with it. And it's that moment where Boromir understands that he really desires the ring and thinks it's the only thing that can save his kingdom, or his stewardom.
And the Tower Guard shall take up the call. The Lords of Gondor have returned.
You can see here how Boromir is so eager to have this glorious return and to just be there for his people. It's both good and bad. I mean, he wants to protect his people. He wants to fight for them. But he's also quite ambitious and more towards the glorious aspects of war, while Faramir is not that much in the glory and more in protecting.
That have not yet come to pass.
So many people think that she means the future, but she only means that things that could happen in the future. So the ring shows you things that did not happen yet, but there's no guarantee that any of what you see is actually the future.
You offer it to me freely.
Again, you see how easy it is for Frodo, though being intimidated and everything, to just let go of the ring and not being completely corrupted by it yet. That was the test for Galadriel. At the end of the First Age, she refused to go into the west with all the other High Elves that had gone into exile from Valinor, and during the First Age had fought against Morgoth. And because she refused to go then, she was basically she had a sentence spoken about her that she would have to pass a test on her character before she was to go to the west, into the west in the end. And the test was the temptation from the ring, and if she would withhold and withstand, then she would pass. As a young woman, Galadriel was actually one of the Eldar who was swayed by the visions of Fëanor to go into Middle-earth and seek for riches and wealth and kingdoms to rule on their own. And she, in the end, never really established it. I mean, she has a realm on her own with Celeborn together, Lothlorien, but she never had a kingdom with huge people and vast lands that she would govern, even though in the beginning she was really tempted by the whole idea.
Do you know how the orcs first came into being? They were elves once.
This story of how the orcs came into being was heavily revised by Tolkien towards the end of his life. So in the beginning he always wrote that they were corrupted elves, corrupted by Morgoth or Melkor. And later he noticed that it doesn't really work out if you have orcs, who are these vile, evil beings, having the same properties as elves, such as an immortal life. And so he redesigned it so that Sauron would have been the one corrupting men, while Melkor was in captivity in Valinor, and Sauron was left free to roam Middle-earth. Still, the problem is that the chronology doesn't match with all the other lore that Tolkien had written in the 40-50 years before that. So that's the reason why Christopher Tolkien didn't include that in the Silmarillion in the end. But Tolkien had a lot of texts that he thought were not perfect, and then he tried to revise them in the end, but they didn't really turn out any more convincing than the ones that had already been established. And also, they created lots of issues because they were referenced so often.
Bring them to me alive and unspoiled. Kill the others.
Oh, and regarding the 3 rings of the elves, so Galadriel is the keeper of Nenya, the ring of water. Gandalf got the ring of fire from Círdan, the shipbuilder, when he came to Middle-earth. And Elrond is the keeper of Vilya, the ring of air. And these 3 are the elven rings that were not taken by Sauron, the most powerful, the ones that were made after Sauron left Eregion, where the elves lived, and so they were made without the corruption of Sauron. Sauron had never touched them, had never altered or influenced them. They were still bound to the power of the ring, because that's how the One Ring was made, that it would govern all the other rings, but they were most independent, and they could use them in the Third Age and preserve the elven kingdoms in a way that time would pass differently and the burden of life would be easier to bear. I think that was the main power of the 3 elven rings. The stay in Lothlorien for the Fellowship lasted a whole month, and they were basically healed of all the wounds and burdens from the previous journey. When Sam is looking back after leaving, he thinks that maybe 3 or 4 days have passed, and that is a sign that the way time passes in the presence of one of the 3 elven rings of power is changed, and things just pass more quickly. So Aragorn's explanation to this whole perception problem is that Sam was perceiving time to pass as it passes for the elves.
And what gift would a dwarf ask of the elves?
Nothing.
The story of Gimli's gift, that he gets the hair of Galadriel, is actually quite a nice arc, because there is a manuscript where Fëanor, the wisest and most crafty of all the elves, or all creatures that have ever been in the world, tries to capture the light of the 2 trees that were there before sun and moon. So you have the golden tree like the sun and the silver tree like the moon, and he tries to mix the light. And in the beginning he doesn't manage to do it, and he asks Galadriel, who has hair of the color of the 2 lights mingled, whether he can have a strand of her hair. And she denies him several times until he ends up solving it in a different way. So you also see how Galadriel has changed a lot since her youth, because she gives her hair willingly to the dwarf, one of the ancient, more enemy kind of people in Middle-earth. What Gimli makes out of it afterwards is a stone with the hairs inside, which is a token of his house.
To rise
after he
above the height
establishes
of all your fathers since
his
the
new
days of Elendil,
it's not a country,
fall
but
into
basically the
darkness
dwelling for his people
with all that is left of
in
your
the
king.
glittering caves behind Helm's Deep. Yeah, the way she said Earendil was not really quite accurate, because people who have an English or Anglophone background tend to say the E and A together as a diphthong. But it's really one vowel after the other, Earendil. And if you want to watch the movie with having really accurate Elvish pronunciation for all the actors, not just Viggo Mortensen and Christopher Lee, you need to watch the Spanish dub, which is incredibly accurate in that regard. So here you see them passing from the river Celebrant into the great river Anduin. In the book, at some point, they are attacked by orcs from the east during the night. They are being shot at with arrows. And that is the reason why they are stopping at the western shore of the Falls of Rauros, or the lake that is in front there. The Argonath was created in I think the middle or the beginning of the Third Age. And what you see are the statues of Elendil and Anarion. Anarion being the younger brother of Isildur. Because Anarion was the first king of Gondor after the realms Arnor and Gondor properly split off. And Isildur would have been the king of Arnor. But he was killed in the disaster of the Gladden Fields. So you see two hills on the left and on the right, and the island in the middle of the lake, and they each have a name. The left, I think, is Amon-La, and the right hill is Amon-Hen. And Amon-Hen is the one that Frodo will climb up later and sit on these, the seat of sight, where in the ancient days people were supposed to sit and be able to see very far. And on the other hill, on the other side, they would be able to hear a lot of things going around. So these were two seats to survey the surrounding countries, none of which would be under the rule of Gondor. This would be the border of Gondor in the ancient times. The book ends almost exactly at this point, when the people notice that Frodo isn't there anymore, and they all start chaotically running in two different directions, trying to find him, because they're all tired and stressed, and they think they can't stop and make a plan of how to find Frodo. They just all have to run different directions. And then the death of Boromir and the breaking of the Fellowship only comes at the beginning of the second volume. Right? I shouldn't say books, because it's 2 books per volume and 3 volumes for the entire Lord of the Rings. In the book, he actually more feels that Sauron is searching for him while he's actively watching other parts. And I think the description in the book is that he is seeing all the armies of Mordor in the south ones, the Easterlings, the Corsairs of Umbar, all drawing to Mordor and becoming this huge power. And it's while he's watching this that he is perceived by Sauron. But he doesn't quite notice him before he takes the ring off. The ring is calling him by his elven name now. First Aragorn, Elessar. So Aragorn is the grey elvish name that was given to him by his parents, and Elessar is the name that was given to him as a nickname. It's a high elvish name, and that is the name that he will later gain as a king. Tar Elessar, the King Elfstone. Elessar means Elfstone because Aragorn is supposed to have a greenish shining stone that has healing capabilities, so it can heal those who are around him. It's kind of inspired by a Silmaril, but I don't think it's supposed to be the same. Yeah, that was a great release from Legolas again. Sometimes he's shooting really great, and then, especially in the later movies, it just deteriorates. I will comment that in the next and third installment of this series. The actor used to really hit the stuntman hard. There was an interview with one of them where they said, or actually it was an interview with the actor of Mary, I think, where they said that he would just mercilessly hit them, all of them, at full strength. It makes for a really realistic movie, though. So this shot here shows 6 shots by the magical part, and the full scene actually contained 9 arrow shots, but they never showed it fully. In the books, it's mentioned very often that hobbits are quite dangerous when throwing stones, but obviously against helmets and fully armored enemies, this is quite of a stretch. That's why they never emphasize it in the movies. The Uruk-hai also doesn't have too bad a release. He's shooting quite well. Something that's a bit annoying about the orc is he's shooting in a reverse grip, and that only works if you then put the arrow on the right side of the bow, so that when you twist the string, the arrow is pushed against the bow. But in the way it's shown here in the movie, it's on the wrong side, so you can't shoot like that. You can't have the arrow on the left side of the bow and then release and the arrow is flipping away. It doesn't work. I tried it. I used to not really get emotional at scenes like that in any movie, except scared when it's scary music. But the older I get, the more teary-eyed I get when I see scenes from The Lord of the Rings. Not many other films, but definitely Lord of the Rings. In the book, Aragorn doesn't fight a particularly prominent Uruk-hai, and also the character that is shown here, which is named Lurtz in the movies, doesn't have a role in the book. Aragorn just arrives too late and sees Boromir dead among dozens of foes, slain foes.
I do not know what strength is like.
Take note of the gauntlet that Boromir has on his forearms. I never noticed it until I watched the audio commentary of the movies. That Boromir has these gauntlets of brown leather with the white tree emblazed on it, and in the next the scene afterwards, Aragorn is actually putting them on. So he is carrying on a piece of Boromir's armor to show that he's basically in honor of him.
They will look for his coming from the White Tower, but he will not return.
In the book, they make poems about his death, each one. I think Gimli does not, just Aragorn, Legolas. 3 chapters, or 3 verses. Now comes the scene where the actor Sean Astin ran into the lake and had a 10 or 20 centimeter glass shard go through his foot and sticking out the other side. Sounded really gory in the documentary. And he had to be brought to the hospital directly with the helicopter and everything. And because they have these latex feet, hobbit feet, around the actual feet, they had to peel everything off and it was just blood everywhere. Yeah, quite nasty. But in the documentary they also discuss that Elijah apparently was really fascinated by the amount of blood coming out there and was playing with all the blood clots. Yeah, this is not part of the story, how it is written in the books. In the books, Sam arrives at the lake, notices that one of the boats is moving without anybody around, and he notices that Frodo must be wearing the ring and trying to escape. So he just joins in and they both leave together. No almost drowning or anything. But Sam really cannot swim. I mean, hobbits in general do not swim, and it's extremely rare if anyone learns to. And I think Frodo's parents, or one of them, drowns. The reason why Sam is always saying Mr. Frodo, and Frodo is just saying Sam, is because Frodo is a noble person in the Shire, and Sam is his servant. And it's one of the themes of The Lord of the Rings, how these boundaries are broken up, and how the whole fellowship bond can be beyond ranks and anything that is connected to that. And I've heard people saying that this would be because of Tolkien's experience as a soldier in the First World War. And also, just a second ago, you saw the scene how Aragorn was putting on the gauntlets. Alright guys, that was the coverage of me watching the Fellowship of the Ring, the first part of the Lord of the Rings movie. It is only one movie, yes. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something that you didn't already know. And I'll be looking forward to having you join me again when we watch the Two Towers.